What's up, guys? Welcome to another studio episode. Got a Q&A episode today. We've got a lot of questions. It's another sunny, stupidly hot triple-digit day in the Southwest with no monsoons or wildlife or anything interesting in sight. So a few of my channel members have asked some questions recently in comments that I noticed, and rather than, they were kind of intense, like I didn't want to write, so that's why we're making this video. I figured that they're definitely not the only ones who have questions like these, so I'm gonna answer some specific questions, some very Canon gear, lens, camera body specific questions. And I know that's a little bit niche, but I also know that there's a lot of you here that would probably still be interested in that. And then I'm also going to talk about a couple of general things that it doesn't matter what you have. All right, so let's get into the main the first question that got me on this. So this is from one of my channel members. So huge shout out to the channel members. I love you guys. If you guys love what I do and you want to help support the channel a little more than liking, commenting, and subscribing, you can check out the channel members. There's a lot of extra content over there, and it's just a really great community, and I really appreciate the support. So anyways, this is from Sparrowhawk808, and this was actually a couple weeks ago, and I'm sorry I left you hanging for so long. It's been an intense couple of weeks. So anyways, he's going to Yellowstone, and he would just want to make sure he gets everything right, and he's definitely in the right place following the right YouTuber, because he says that he overanalyzes things, and if you're not new here, you know I too overanalyze things. It's my superpower. Also my super weakness. All right, so he's got a Canon R5 and an RF 800. Based on the question, I'm not sure if he has these other lenses or if he's considering them. Looks like he's got a 70-200. Here's his line of thinking for Yellowstone. I think we all know, kind of, even if you've never been to Yellowstone, I'm sure you've seen pictures of it, videos of it, documentaries, movies, whatever. It's a pretty big place. It's geophysically, geographically, it's massive. The landscapes are huge. The wildlife is huge and varying. You can get wildlife that's right on the roadside. You can get wildlife that is a mile away on a hilltop, and anywhere in between. So that brings a lot of problems. And I've been to Yellowstone many times, and I have suffered from these problems every single time. So basically what he's looking for is, he's fortunate enough to have an R5 and an RF 800, which is going to give you a lot of reach and a decent high megapixel camera for, that's good for cropping and the like. So that's awesome. But then he's also fortunate enough to be able to be looking into having a second body of some type. And here's where his conundrum comes in, is that in his case, budget is still a concern. So, not everybody can just run out and grab two R5s or an R3 or whatever. And I'm in the same boat. I totally get it. So the things that he's looking for, his train of thought here is, I'm just going to read it because it'll help me think better. I have an R5. If I get a second body, I want to have it the same form factor and batteries to keep things simple. So that is definitely how I like to think as well. I really like, for the most part, that Canon has the same batteries. Budget is something of a factor because this body likely sits in my bag a lot. I still love my R5. So I've looked at all the mirrorless bodies from the R to the R10. I have discounted the crop bodies because I feel like, personally, full frame is the better route. So that's definitely subjective, and that's definitely personal preference, and that's noted here. I think for the performance, the R6 has the right tools, but from a budget standpoint, the R8, but neither screams a great solution. So that's also a fair point, because both have their pros and cons for sure, especially when you're comparing them to an R5. I still have an R6 original, and I have my R6 Mark II. I still love my R6 and I still use it a lot, but mostly as a backup camera these days. I'm just going to interject real quick here and just say, a lot of people ask me this too, and this is kind of relevant, but not really, because he hasn't mentioned it. I just going to throw out my personal opinion on, if you can only have one body right now and you have a medium budget, you can't afford an R5, but you can afford to play around with something a little lower. The Canon R6 Mark II, in my opinion, as of summer 2023, is the best Canon camera out there, period. There is nothing better all around. And I say that with price in mind, features and price in mind, you know, because obviously the R3 and the R5 have a few features that beat the R6 Mark II, but overall, it has features that beat both of them, including the price and the size and the value and all of that stuff, having the same autofocus as the R3, having that's superior to the R5, and having used the R6 Mark II for wildlife, I can tell you that the autofocus is way better, and you can check my videos for that. But that was just a quick little, if you can only get one all around, it is expensive, but relatively it's not as expensive as some of the other options like an R5 or an R3. So that's just my 2 cents there. All right, so let me go ahead and finish out reading this question. The other route that I've considered is what you talk about as a hybrid shooter using the MFN button. So my favorite feature overall of the R5, I think this is an R5. Nope, that's an R6. I don't know where my R5 is. I think Camera Lady probably has it. Anyways, doesn't matter. This button right there, that's the MFN button. It's on most cameras, most Canon cameras. With the R5, the beautiful thing about that, because it has an electronic dial, it doesn't have the stupid physical dial like all the other cameras have for switching between modes. That means your mode switching is electronic. That means that you can program the MFN button to switch from video to stills with one click. That also means that you can set your record button that's on there to your C3 custom settings and have it record in something completely different. So to me, having 2 different ways to film in 2 different, I have on my R5, I have my record button when I'm in stills mode taking pictures. I can hit the record button and I have that set to record 8K 30. And I use that for wildlife a lot when I want to be able to punch into a 4K timeline and effectively double my focal length, or just have really high quality video. And then I have the MFN button to switch to 4K 60 or 4K 120, usually 4K 60. That way if I want regular wildlife or being able to slow it down a little bit and have slow motion wildlife, then that's my standard, 4K 60. There it is. So those are my 2 options that I have immediately with one click, both on my R5. And I've made a whole video about that, so rather than continue dragging this on, you can check that video out. It's by far my favorite feature of the R5. Okay, so the next thing is, he's saying here, if you went this route with the hybrid shooting and the MFN button, he would say that the Tamron isn't the right lens. He's talking about the Tamron 150 to 600 G2, and the RF 100 to 500 would be his best option for just the best overall lens without having to add a second body. And then maybe throwing in a 1.4 teleconverter on there as well. If he goes that route, he says he has an M50 with a 70 to 200 that he could use as a glorified camcorder in that case. Any second body, I think that would be great. An M50 is going to give you a massive crop with the 70 to 200 on there, so could be handy for wildlife. Let's talk about wildlife in general, and this is the general part of it that's going to apply to the question asker and to everybody else here. The biggest thing that you need to remember in wildlife photography is that no amount of gear is going to help you if the animals are too far away. And in Yellowstone, that is often the case. Yeah, you can get lucky with a grizzly bear or an elk or something like right on the roadside. But if you see a wolf pack that's half a mile away, a mile away, if you see a grizzly that's up a hill, like way far away, down in the valley, if you're trying to shoot buffalo and they look like this big in the screen, all of those, none of that is going to help you. Just don't even bother cropping. Just take it as a wildlife, environmental, landscape portrait type of deal and get those shots, because Cropping too hard, nothing's worse than cropping too hard. Heat haze is a real thing. I've talked about it in many, many videos. Even at Yellowstone, which is like a lot of 8,000 plus feet in elevation, and even in the wintertime, whatever, it doesn't matter when, it doesn't matter where, heat haze is real. You're shooting through atmospheric distortion. Physics is not your friend. Do not try to put a teleconverter on to get closer to something that is half a mile away. It will not work. I have lots of videos on this. Physics is not your friend. Okay, so that was just a tangent that I just want to make sure that everybody knows about for wildlife photography in Yellowstone and anywhere else in the world. Nothing will get you better images than being able to be the right distance away. And I don't say closer, because in Yellowstone and with wildlife in general, there are definitely rules. And getting too close to wildlife is dangerous for both the wildlife and for yourself. So hopefully you know that. And there's a fine balance between when can I walk closer, when can I try to get closer, when do I need to back up, and when do I need to book it back to the vehicle or just get away, period. All right, but with that PSA aside, if you're fortunate enough to have two bodies, then with Yellowstone, I think having one body, having a high megapixel body with the longest reach that you can get, in his case, in the OP's case, an R5 with an 800 is going to be great for a lot of things, or an R5 with a zoom lens like the 100 to 500, because the power of the R5 for me, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but I actually don't mind using crop mode at all, because it's going to add that effective focal length, 1.6, so it's going to turn my 500 into an 800. And then, this is the part that people really don't like to hear, is that I still crop into that. I still crop into that to another 30% or so. That's if the light and atmospheric conditions are good enough. If it's sharp enough and the light is good and there's no heat haze, personally, I don't have a problem cropping in when already in crop mode. And that's because megapixels just don't bother me as much as they bother everybody else. This is my personal rule of thumb, and I know people don't like it, but I don't care, because you're not me and I'm not you. This works for me. I am okay cropping down to anything, even if I'm already in crop mode, even if I'm on the R6, whatever. I am okay to cropping an image as far as 2160 pixels on the vertical edge. Why? Because that's 4K. So that means I can put it into a 4K timeline on YouTube and not have to crop in, and I can put it on Instagram and Facebook and still have it higher than what they personally demand. The internet does not even demand 2160, and that is just my personal, it's okay for me. I have printed images that are less than that, much bigger, 3 feet, 5 feet. I mean, I've printed big images from 12 megapixels or less. And I find that when I crop into an R5 that's already in crop, when you put the R5 in crop mode, you're getting it down to like 17, 18 megapixels. And then when you crop into that, I'm looking at anywhere between 8 to 12 megapixels. And like I said, as long as the light is good, the subject is good, the image looks good, I'm okay with that. It doesn't bother me. You just need to figure out if that bothers you or not. But that also makes, the whole reason I'm talking about all this is because that makes my personal kit, for me, a little more versatile. Like, I do have the 800, but sometimes I don't want to deal with the F11. Sometimes just knowing that I can put my R5 in the crop mode and then have an effective 800 that's a 7.1 instead of an F11. A lot of times I'll go with that. I have done a video about the teleconverter with the R5 and the 800 too. You can check that out if you want to see when and why and how I would use a teleconverter with the 100 to 500. So back to the OP's thing as having a second body. In the Canon world, this is the niche part. Let's go over a couple of good options, I think, for the OP and for everybody. So he's already stated that he doesn't want a crop body, and that's understandable. So that takes out the R7, R100, R50, R10. I'm kind of behind on my crop bodies. And then that leaves effectively an R8 or an R6, it sounds like, or within his budget, it probably sounds like an R6 Mark II is a little bit out of the budget there. So in that case, the only downsides for me about the R8, I think the R8 is probably one of the most well-rounded cameras that Canon make, because it is basically an R6 Mark II crammed in an RP body, and I loved my RP. But if I had the money, I would definitely have an R8 right now just for my bag, because it's great for hiking, it's great for time lapses, it's great for video, it's great for all-around photos. It has, even for wildlife, I think it's very versatile because it has the same autofocus as the R6 Mark II. It's full frame, so it doesn't have quite the same issues that the R7 has. The two downsides are that it doesn't have IBIS, and it doesn't have the LP6 batteries, which I love and are in all of my other cameras. It has the same batteries, the little tiny ones, as the RP, and that was the one thing about the RP that I didn't like. However, personally, that's not a huge deal to me, because if you're going with an R8 or an RP, you're going for that size. You want something more compact. So having a bigger battery kind of defeats that purpose. Nevertheless, it's still an issue, especially for the OP saying he doesn't want a bunch of different batteries. The R6, the original R6, is, like I said, it's a great camera. It's got the same autofocusing as the R5, and for all intents and purposes, it is the same as an R5 for the exception of the megapixels and the 8K video, that kind of thing. I love the images that come out of my R6. I've never had a problem with them. I've used the R6 for wildlife too. I've cropped in on the R6. I have videos about that as well. You just got to know the limits, you know. Even though I say that I personally don't have a problem with lower megapixel cameras, I don't, because I have them. But I also have an R5, and I also love my R5. And I know when I want and when I need to use one over the other. That being said, the R6 is incredible for landscape. It's great for everything else. It's low light. It's better than the R5 for low light. So even sometimes going out, if I know that I'm not going to crop too much and I'm going to be shooting real early or real late, either before or after the sun comes down, then there are still some times where I might grab my R6 instead. Although these days with the new AI noise reduction in Photoshop and Lightroom and Topaz and denoise and all of these things, like ISO is way less a concern to me. ISO is one of those things that I've never really been bothered by either, because I'd rather get the shot than not at all. So personally, I don't mind cranking my ISOs. That's a little bit of a tangent, but it might still be relevant for some people out there. I know the OP said he didn't want to deal with the batteries and stuff, and I don't know how he feels about IBIS, but I think personally, if it was for me right now in 2023, I probably would switch out my R6 for an R8, except that camera lady won't let me do it because she doesn't like the R8. She loves her IBIS and the big battery size and everything. So unless I can come up with enough money to just buy myself an R8 without her having any say in it, which is implausible, I would. But that's just me. I don't mind not having IBIS, especially for wildlife, because I'm typically shooting faster anyways, and I also have pretty steady hands. As you guys probably know, if you're not new to the channel, I never use a tripod for wildlife. I don't like it. I prefer hand holding. That's just me. Again, that's personal preference. But I don't mind not having the IBIS for wildlife. With everything else, the R8, I would rather have that focus. It is a bit better than the R5 focusing, and I really enjoy it. If the R5 had the R6 Mark II and R8 focusing system, that would be my dream camera right there. So personally, especially as a second body to an R5, I would definitely take an R8. And that's just coming from a person who has had an R6 since it's been out. But if you can get a better deal on the R6, I don't know the prices of an R6 right now, but if it's comparable to an R8 and you really want the IBIS and the battery, then the R6 is incredible. It's still great. And as a second body, what I would recommend is throwing your wide like a 24 to 105, 70 to 200, whatever you're going to use that you're not going to be cropping with as much. So if an animal gets close, or if you see a nice landscape opportunity or whatever, the R6 I think would be incredible for that. And then put your longest lens on the R5. That way you have the ability to have the highest resolution and the ability to crop in on your longest lens. That's just my 2 cents for how I would do it and how I do usually operate with my wildlife. Okay, another question from a channel member recently was he has an RP and he wants to know, and he does wildlife mostly, and he wants to know if an R7 would be a good upgrade from the RP. So a couple fundamental differences. The RP is full frame, the R7 is a crop body, but if you're mostly doing wildlife, then having a crop body is cool because you get that extra effective reach. I don't remember who asked me this, I don't remember the comment, but if you're watching this, go check, or if you have a similar question, just go check out, I have an R7 playlist, I think, or maybe it's in my wildlife. I have a few videos on the R7, and I talk about what I love and what I don't love about the R7. So check that out and see if those issues are going to be a problem for you. But I would say in general that the R7 would be a good wildlife upgrade from the RP. Just watch out for that rolling shutter and the pulsing AF issues. But overall, even with those two things, I still think you're going to get a much higher keeper rate and have more of that effective reach than with the RP. And I think those two things overall are still going to help out a lot. And then last question I got recently was what happened to my R7? I sold it. And I made a final long-term review of the R7, which will maybe answer that question a little bit deeper rather than re-talking about it. I think mostly I sold it because there was some other gear that I wanted and I couldn't afford it outright. So I would have actually liked to keep the R7. It would have been nice, but I just couldn't justify it having an R5, an R6 Mark II, and an R6. I couldn't justify it with the other stuff that I needed, and being, a little things tight financially. It just made better sense for my business and financials to just sell the R7 and then use that for the other gear that I wanted. So that's what I did. But I probably would have kept it if I really could have. And I do still think that it is by far the best APS-C mirrorless Canon camera out there. Not just for wildlife, especially for wildlife, it has most of the issues that it has, I think, are with wildlife. You have the buffer problem, the rolling shutter problem, those kind of things, the autofocusing pulsing issue. If you're not doing wildlife, if you're doing portraits, landscapes, that kind of stuff, the R7 is going to be an incredible camera. It's just absolutely wonderful for landscapes and portraits and non-wildlife stuff. And it's still great for wildlife too. So I do still recommend the R7. Just pay attention to its limits is all I'm saying. All right, well, I'm gonna wrap it up here. Hopefully that gives you some food for thought into those types of questions and my line of thinking for how I operate, and just some helpful advice at all. If there's anything that I missed or you have any other questions of your own, leave them down in the comments below and I will definitely answer them. If you're still here through all of that, I really appreciate it. It means the world to me that you give me your time. Definitely hit that like button for me, because that's the best, easiest thing you can do for the channel. And hopefully we're gonna get some late monsoons and I will be back out there very shortly with both some landscape, astro, and wildlife content coming up. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.